Okay, I'm really nervous. I'll be so much happier when I'm done talking. My name is Jill Ferris. I'm 60 years old, and for the past 35 of those, I've been working in the U.S. polar programs. Currently, I own Polar Field Services, and we support NSF-funded research in the Arctic. But my polar career started in Antarctica, back when my name was Jill Liberado, and as a shuttle driver in McMurdo in 1984. I'm really honored to be here today, and also I feel really intimidated standing up here talking in front of all of you, and to have been asked to be part of this discussion on the brains and brawn of the U.S. Antarctic Program. In preparing for this talk, it's been so interesting to look back and reflect on how many changes there have been in the program, and especially for women. Although a small number of hardy women have been working in the program, although a small number of women have been working in the Antarctic program for the past 10 years. By the time that I started, the ice was still a really male-dominated, the ice was still really male-dominated, and in 1984, by today's standards, a hostile work environment for women. In the 1970s and 80s, in general, women were only hired for the low-paying jobs. They were paid less than men for all of the positions, and in general, there was no consideration given to having females on the ice. Behaviors that were tolerated then behaviors that would not be tolerated today God dang it. Behaviors that would not be tolerated and get one fired today were the norm on the ice in those early years. I should have had a drink before this. Initially, I went to the ice for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, what I found in the polar programs is, in addition to the incredible environment, was a group of adventurous, creative, and resilient people that I could relate to. For me, it was all those factors that made me want to return for a second year, even after how bizarre it was to be a woman in what I experienced my first year on the ice. So for this 50-year celebration of women in Antarctica, I'm going to share my experience and connections to some of the women who started working in the program before I did. These women paved the way for my journey. Their determination and leadership helped break down the barriers for all the women working on the ice today. I understand that 1974 was the very first year that women worked on the ice for the NSF Contractor, who was then Homes and Narver. And I believe they hired 2 women to work as administrative assistants. And I also believe that those 2 women were related to Homes and Narver employees. I don't know how many women H&N hired between 1974 and 1978, which is when my connection to the ice started. Toby Freeman and A.C. Hitch, who first worked in 1978, were both still working on the ice during my first year. And what I understand is that most of the women who were hired in the early years were related to someone at H&N or were friends with someone in the company. And as time went on, other women found out about the program from these first few women who told others about the program. And that was true for me. I grew up in Bay City, Michigan, and as a kid, my parents took my sister and I on camping vacations all over the country. 2 of those trips were to Yellowstone and Glacier National Park. From those trips, I got a sense of adventure and fell in love with the national parks in the West. During my senior year of high school, I got a job working at Glacier National Park. And I headed out there in 1977 after I graduated from high school and stayed out west after that. The following winter, I got a job at a ski area in Whitefish, Montana. And the next summer, I got a job at Denali National Park in Alaska. And then after that, I returned back down to Montana and I worked for the Fish and Game. I got into cycle touring And I also started college briefly. I went to school for about 3 weeks when I realized I wasn't ready for it. And so instead I headed to New Zealand in 1980 on a bicycle touring trip with a friend that I had met working at Denali. On that trip, we spent about 4 months cycling around New Zealand. And it was there while staying one night in a youth hostel, I noticed a woman standing in front of a window holding up 35mm slides to the window to view them, and we started talking, and she shared her stories with me from Antarctica. Her name was Ferris. She had just gotten off the ice from working as a GA in the BFC in McMurdo. And although I had no idea at the time, that one chance encounter had a huge impact on the direction of my life and the beginning of my journey to the poles. Back then, as you've all heard, there was no internet, no computers, and no social media. So the opportunity to find out about the Antarctic program was pretty limited. And the photos and stories that Carrie shared with me about the ice piqued my interest. And she gave me information about how to apply for the job. Carrie's interest in going to the ice is kind of interesting. She really wanted to go there for the free trip to New Zealand. In her freshman year at Kalamazoo College, one of her professors made movies for Audubon and showed one of them of New Zealand. And she vowed after seeing him that she would go there one day. And about 3 years later, a friend of hers told her about a company that was looking for women to go to Antarctica. And to get there, you would get to go through New Zealand. And that was all she needed to know. So she went to an interview in Minneapolis, and she said that it seemed that she had all that she needed for the job. She had a science background, she was used to cold weather, she was a woman, and she knew how to drink. The interview was in a hotel, and they were put in the bar to wait for hours as they send women up one by one to get interviewed. She said she really wasn't much of a drinker, but she knew how to fit in around those who did. She intended to go to the ice just for the birding opportunity, but she was drawn to the program, and she returned for 4 more seasons after that, including doing a winter over in the BFC in 1982. And today, Carrie lives in Idaho. She's on her 29th year as a school teacher. This year, she's teaching 4th grade. And she's still close friends with many of the women that she worked with in Antarctica 40 years ago. So after my bicycling trip in New Zealand, I returned back to Montana and decided I should get serious with school. So to pay for it, I got a job with a company called Big Bear Resources. They operated a sheltered workshop and 3 group homes for mentally handicapped adults. And back in high school, one of my summer jobs was to work in a recreation program for mentally handicapped kids. So I used that experience to help me get a full-time job managing the group home. And when I started college, I went for a biology major, but after working at the group home, I changed my major to psychology. I really enjoyed working with the handicapped community, and I thought that that would be my career path. However, while I was attending college, I continued to apply for a job in Antarctica, but I never did get a job offer. So in 1984, I turned in an application, and also I started sending in postcards every week from all these different places with a note on it, please hire I really want to go to Antarctica. So in 1984, when I graduated from college, I decided to move up to Alaska and look for a job in my field up there. So I drove an old Scout International with a girlfriend from college, and she had a sister who lived in Anchorage who offered me a place to stay. I did find a job in Anchorage working for a program for mentally handicapped adults. And as luck would have it, just as I got settled into a place to live and the job, I got offered a job in Antarctica. I guess those postcards really helped. So my immediate response was yes. I knew I could always go back to Alaska, but I didn't think I'd ever get a chance to go to Antarctica again. So I sold my truck, packed up what I could, and gave away everything else I had. Oops. So except for that talk with Carrie in New Zealand about the ice, I didn't know anyone who had ever worked there, and I really didn't know what to expect when I got there. And what I found out when I got to McMurdo It was a totally weird and fascinating place. There was a huge Navy presence and a small civilian population working there, and McMurdo felt like a military base, a man's work camp, a bit of the Wild West, with science kind of happening somewhere way in the background. That first year, I was placed out to Willie Field to live. Willie was, as you've heard before, Willie was a camp on the Ross Ice Shelf and to support runway operations for the Navy ski-equipped LC-130 airplanes. During those days, Willie had quite a few residents, including both military and contractor personnel. In 1984, there were 5 women living out at Willie. 4 were shuttle bus drivers, and the 5th person was Jules Liberado. By 1984, my first year, Jules was already a legend in terms of females working on the ice. At that time, and for decades after, Jules worked as a heavy equipment operator. Her connection to the ice was her mother worked for H&N. She started her first year in 1979 as a GA at South Pole, and she retired in 2017 after working 37 seasons on the ice. I believe that's a record, but I'm not sure. Anyone who has ever met Jules will never forget her, and simply put, she's just one of life's true characters. And I don't think any celebration of 50 years of women in Antarctica would be the same without a shout out to Jules. Okay, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I'm going to be honest. As I mentioned earlier, although women had been in the mix for 10 years by the time I started, there appeared to be no thought or changes made to integrate women into the workforce. In fact, on my first day when I arrived at Willie Field to move into the place that I would be living, I walked into this building and heard a man shout out, "Hey, the shuttle beeps are here." Those were my welcoming words to this co-ed space. And you can fill in that beep with the C word. The building we lived in was a long rectangular box with a hallway down the center and bedrooms along each side. On most of the bedroom doors of this co-ed facility were multiple pictures of fully nude women taped to each of the doors along the hallway. After I'd been there for a bit, I asked the site manager if the nude photos could come down because I had to walk down this hallway to get to the bathroom every day. And the response I got was a flat no. I don't recall his exact words, but the intent of his message to me was, "This is the way it is around here, and if you want to work here, deal with it." As I came to find out, this was not just at Willie Field, it was really the atmosphere around McMurdo and all of the work centers. Well, I should say a lot of the work centers. Oh, it's right here. Driving the shuttle that first season gave me the opportunity to meet many of the people working in McMurdo, Willie Field, and at Scott Base, which was a New Zealand base about 2 miles from McMurdo. Because there were so few women working on the ice then, I got to meet and know all of them. Some of those women are still working in the polar programs today, including Leslie Blank and Ray Spain. Leslie started in the program in 1981 as a GA in the BFC. She found out about the program while she was working for the U.S. Forest Service in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. In 1980, a man that was on her crew also worked on the ice and told her about the program and that they were looking for women. Leslie applied for 2 years in a row and got a job offer on her second try. The experience she had in her first year is unfortunately not surprising. A man in a supervisory position became infatuated with her to the point that it impacted her daily work situation. By today's standards, he was sexually harassing her. He kept pressuring her to sleep with him, but she refused. And because of that, she was blacklisted and not able to get a job the next year on the ice in any department. Fortunately, a year later, that man no longer was working for the contractor, and another man who understood the real story about what happened to her offered her a position on his crew for the next season. Over the years, Leslie has had a long and varied career in the program. She also went back to college to get her degree, and she attended a 5-month trades program for women in carpentry. She's worked at all 3 of the U.S. stations and many remote field camps over the years. Her positions have included carpenter helper, journeyman carpenter, field camp cook, field camp manager, equipment operator, and in 1986, she did a winter over in the McMurdo power plant. And now, since 2009, Leslie's been working full-time in the program. Currently, she's a science project manager, working directly with the researchers to plan their support. I'm sure a number of you know Leslie. Ray Spain was a friend of Toby Friedman's, who first worked on the ice in 1978. Ray said that after seeing Toby's pictures and hearing about the ice, she was determined to go. She sent in an application and called the HN office weekly, and she traveled to their headquarters in California for an interview and spent 8 hours in interviews there with a whole bunch of different people to apply for a GA job. She continued to call them after the interviews, and 6 weeks after, she was offered the GA position. Over the decades since 1979, Ray has worked as a carpenter helper, a journeyman carpenter. She took seasons off to travel in between, and in 1998, she took the job as lake or camp manager in the Dry Valleys. Ray worked as the Lake Corps camp manager for 19 consecutive seasons. She excelled in this position, which included managing the camp facilities and equipment, coordinating daily helicopter and cargo operations, and providing ongoing support for the scientists. In addition to all the management aspects of the job, Ray also put her own flair on the position in making the camp a comfortable and welcoming place for all. And she accomplished this in part with her fabulous cooking, which she managed to do in addition to all those other duties. In 2014, her camp management and cooking at Lake Corps was featured in an article by Jalen Martin in Food and Wine magazine. And also a bit of trivia is that in 2017, while Anthony Bourdain was in Antarctica, he went to Lake Corps and filmed an episode that included Ray's camp management and cuisine. Ray retired from the Antarctic Program in 2018, but she still continues to work for us at Fuller Field Services. She's had a number of jobs with us, and for the past few years, she's been working at Tula Field Station as a helicopter coordinator with us. By the end of my first season, I knew that I wanted to return, and the job I pursued for that next season was in McMurdo as a fuelie. In those days, the job involved driving the truck up to most of the buildings in McMurdo and filling all the fuel tanks there used to heat the buildings. When I think back on it, I think the reason that I was interested in this job was because I could work alone and I didn't have to deal with all the guys, which was my experience that I didn't really care for so much in driving the shuttle bus. After that year as a fuelie, I took a year off from the ice to travel, but I also put my name in the hat to winter over in the BFC. At that time, a woman named Ann Peoples was supervising the BFC, and fortunately, she offered me the position. Ann started as a shuttle driver in 1981. She found out about the program in 1980 when attending a women's conference in Bozeman, Montana, where she saw a booth with a banner on it that said "Work in Antarctica." At that time, Ann was working seasonally as an archaeologist for the BLM. The first person that Ann met at the booth was Jules Liberado, who was standing outside the booth and talking with people. Ann said that as she listened to Jules, she realized that a job in Antarctica would work perfectly for her. She could work for the BLM in the northern summer and go to Antarctica in the southern summer and travel in between. During Ann's 15-year career in the program, she led the way in many firsts for women in the contract force. She was the first woman to supervise the BFC, the first woman hired in a true management position, and the first female station manager. Ann said that she considers the BFC position, pivotal in breaking through the glass ceiling. She said there was much resistance from different people within the in the company who opposed to hiring a woman for that position because it had so much responsibility. And she was warned that people were waiting for her to fail, but of course they didn't. Of course she didn't. During Ann's tenure on the ice, she also did a lot to bring other women into the workforce and promote qualified women into positions of responsibility, including me. And today, Ann is the principal and founder of Mapp Consulting, a company she started in 2000 that specializes in proposal development for both the government and business clients. It was an experience that I had in the BFC, working directly with the scientists and providing science support, that motivated me to continue down the Polar Program's career path. I did that 14-month stint in the BFC, and then I continued to work in the BFC for Ann through the 80s. And during the 80s, each season, a few more women were hired into contractors' jobs. And as more women came into the program, the atmosphere on the ice slowly started to change, and very slowly, the situation on the ice was improving for women. In 1990, when ASA took over as the contractor, Ann Peoples was offered a logistics management position, and she recommended me for the BFC supervisor job. This was a full-time job that required me to move to Denver, where ASA set up their headquarters. It was a great opportunity for me, and I was thrilled. There were big changes in the Antarctic program during the 1990s, primarily due to the departure of the Navy, who had run most of the station services. When ASA won the contract, they started to take over many of the services, including running the cafeteria, equipment and vehicle maintenance, inventory management, runway operations, maintenance, and housing, and many other functions. During the 90s, more contractors' jobs opened up and many more women were hired into the program. And by the mid-90s, there were more women in supervisor and management jobs, and the overall number of women on the ice increased dramatically. With more women on the ice, a solidarity developed around acceptable and appropriate behavior on the ice. We became less tolerant of inappropriate behavior, and there was finally support within the contractor management, which was new. Also during the 90s, McMurdo started to feel like a research station. With the departure of the Navy and the dedication of the new Cray Lab in 1991, planning for the scientists and environmental cleanup of the station were gaining long-needed focus and attention. Also, in 1994, I took a newly created job as the Field Science Operations Manager. In this new position, the work centers that provided direct support to the researchers reported to me. Little did I know at the time that this change would help to give me a broader background and the experience I would need to start a company to support the NSF Polar Program in the Arctic. In 1999, while still working for ASA, I found out that the NSF had issued a request for proposal to expand and develop science support for the Arctic program. Not really thinking it was possible, but doing it anyways, along with a few friends, we wrote a proposal in response to that RFP. Shortly before the proposals were due back, we found an Alaskan-based company with an office in Denver that was interested in polar programs. And I set up a meeting to introduce myself. And in a nutshell, after that meeting, they agreed to team with us and submit our proposal. Along the way, we did something right because we made it through the competition, and our team was selected as the NSF contractor in December of 1999. That's when I formally started Polar Field Services, and we've been working as a contractor for the NSF Arctic program ever since. The two polar programs have a lot of similarity in how science proposals are submitted, reviewed, and awarded within NSF. However, the logistics program in place to support the field science is quite different in each program. What is similar across both polar programs is the type of people drawn to the work. What I experienced in the Antarctic program remains the same today at both poles. The people, including many women, who are drawn to the polar programs as a career including the scientists, the NSF personnel, and the contract staff, are hardy, creative, resilient people with a passion for the program. There's a real community between both programs and a real bond and connection between people that lasts a lifetime. My journey to the ice started 35 years ago and continues today in the Arctic. The changes for women working in polar programs over this time frame have been profound. I truly appreciate what the women who paved the way before me accomplished, and hopefully in turn, I'm continuing to do the same for those who follow. In celebration of the 50 years of Women in Antarctica, I'll leave you with this last slide of my female co-workers at Polar Field Services, who are also bipolar and have their roots in the Antarctic program. I'm done.